this beginning that you have made.
Tel Aviv was built under the shadow of a vision, which casts a long shadow when you have a vision. Tel Aviv became a city officially in 1934. It was a very bourgeois city. That was the official ethos of the city. That was a city of industry. It was about commerce.
Tel Aviv is really an exception within the Zionist project. Zionism in general, and it's not very well known, is an anti-urban movement. It's a rural and agrarian movement, and of course a socialist one. Tel Aviv, being the big metropolis, with an emphasis of course on a bourgeois and capitalist society, is an exception within this general mood.
And to live in Tel Aviv, and people write about it, the poet Charles Chernyakhovsky, is to live without having to be conscious of the fact that you are a Jew, because everyone is a Jew here. At another level, there was the ethos of the city, the joyous city, I would call it, the city of good life, the city of fun, the city of coffee shops, the city of theaters.
So we have a change from an introverted character from the Jewish people living abroad to an extroverted character here in the first modern Jewish city, Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv has to be modern, that's the whole idea. It has to do with the beginning, I'm talking about the second decade of the century. It's not architecture, it's now city planning. Why should a city have a boulevard, Rothschild Boulevard? Well, what's the idea, man? But of course, because a city, a modern city, should have one.
The reason the boulevard happened, it had to happen, because where the boulevard was, that's where there was a dry riverbed. It was a wadi, and it was 8-9 meters deep. And they had to enclose it and straighten it out before they could do anything with it. And once they had it flattened out, which they did by wheelbarrows, and because nobody wanted to build their homes on the wadi, it was bad enough on sand dunes, that's where the boulevard was. They thought that perhaps if they named it after Rothschild, he would invest. And that's another story. He didn't want to invest. He was more on the settling side, on the moshavim, on the kibbutzim, but they still called it Rothschild. And this has always been the main street of Tel Aviv. It's always where everybody gathered. It was like the parliament, people called it, to stand under the first light, to stand under the first kiosk on the corner of Rehov Herzl and Rothschild Boulevard was the thing to do, and that's where you're seen and that's where you're being heard. Of course, the water tower was there. The water tower became a jail because they didn't know where to put the first thief, so they put him in the water tower, and then became a fire brigade, and then it actually became the municipality of the city.
The real change after 48 is that much of the mythic load of the city dissipated. The vision was there, it was reality. What do you do then? That's 48, 49. There was a Jewish state, and the first Hebrew city was indeed the first, and it was indeed Hebrew, and it was indeed a city. So what now? And this is a crisis for Tel Aviv, it's a crisis. But since the late 50s, well into the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, the city is contracted in terms of images and myth into one street, the Strip. And the Strip is, of course, Dizengoff Street, yes. Fancy shops, very expensive thing, where you could get the latest fashion from Europe. Of course, with a delay of 1 or 2 years, always. You don't have internet, but it's a delay. But fashion comes to Israel through Dizengoff Street. What we find is that the name of the street became a verb. Dizengoff Street became le'izdangef, meaning to stroll, to walk, kind of a flaneur, to buy through your eyes what you can't afford. And at the same time, it's not my invention, they call it Israel's Fifth Avenue. And you have the many coffee shops where the Bohemians congregate, and the poets and the literati, if you want. And one was Café Cassit, and it was the cafe of the Bohemians, centered upon one poet, the legendary Nathan Altman. That was his place, the people who came to see him and the other members of the Bohemia. And there was another one which was the bourgeois cafe, Café Roval, which was, I think, something like 30 meters away, that's all. So the two groups sitting there. And then was on the other side of Dizengoff, Café Pinati. When a revolution in Israeli poetry was declared in the early 60s, it meant that people left Cassit and moved to Pinati. That's how it works. So Tel Aviv is actually Dizengoff Street. And when Dizengoff Street declines in the early 70s, Tel Aviv is left without its myth, without this distinction, without Dizengoff Street. And what you have is a sense, and that's especially the 70s, a sense of that the city declines. Visually, the city is going down. I mean, the buildings are not renovated, they look bad. Tel Aviv is an ugly city, very ugly city. That was the image, yes. And it changed in the early 80s, I mean, when the new myth of the non-stop city was invented. That's what I like about Tel Aviv. You find the rise and decline of fashions, of myth and images. The city changes all the time. When you talk about Schenken Street and what happened to Schenken Street, you discover the official myth. And it's funny because I say official about a myth which is popular culture, not the official one, is about two brothers actually. After having spent a few years in New York, they come to Tel Aviv and they want to implant or to import the idea of a Soho or Greenwich Village in Tel Aviv. So they open a gallery and they open a coffee shop, and it's a kind of a hub for the new Bohemia, the young Bohemia. The old Bohemia died with, so to say, with Dizengoff. The new Bohemia congregates around Schenken Street. Whereas the first Hebrew city embodied the idea, the Zionist idea of a Hebrew city, I mean, the new Tel Aviv, which emerges in the 80s, is not concerned with Zionism. What happened in the 90s, at least from my perspective, is that the emergence of a new myth. And this is an architectural myth for a change. I mean, this is the myth of the White City.
The name White City, a nickname, and I think you are right, because the city indeed is grey in the best cases. When for the first time the Bauhaus architecture in Tel Aviv was a topic of an international congress, I think Michael Levin used this name, the White City.
The city, they say, rediscovered, I would say discovered this thing, and it became the official myth of the city. You asked about my book and why it was written, which is a fair question. I think it's very simple. I'm a local patriot, but I'm an ironical local patriot. So I look at the city, I love to live in the city, but I look at the city from outside sometimes. And then I realized, because of the White City and all the fuss made about the White City, that Tel Aviv has something energy which I didn't find in other cities, namely this ability to reinvent itself constantly. And the fact is that Tel Aviv celebrates the official recognition by UNESCO as a civic event. I mean, they call it White Nights, which is quite funny because White Nights belong to St. Petersburg, but who cares actually, yes. So this is Tel Aviv. It's a city that very much, it's mimicking, it's emulating, very conscious of itself, never content with itself, always want to be something else, very aware of its place on the periphery. And at the same time, I'd say it's the biggest achievement of Zionism. I mean, this new settlement built, now I quote from the mythic scriptures, on the deserted piece of land of sand dunes north of Jaffa is it's a city of distinction. Mm-hmm. That's what I like about it.